of the Department of Community Health and Social Sciences. This is the CHAS sponsored grant where our speaker today is going to be Dr. Monica McLemore. Dr. McLemore was supposed to have been with us in the spring, but the presentation was with the COVID crisis that was rapidly unfolding at the time. I'll say a few words about Dr. McLemore and then I'll turn over a conversation. But welcome to all of you who are joining. As far as I can tell, there are 115 people here, which I think is an exceptional turnout. At the University of California, San Francisco, Monica McLemore is a tenured associate professor in Family Health Care Nursing Department, an affiliated scientist, News and Reproductive Health, and a member of the Bixby Center for Global Reproductive Health. She retired from clinical practice as a public health and staff nurse after a 28-year clinical nursing career. Her program of research is focused on understanding reproductive justice. To date, she has 61 peer-reviewed articles, op-eds, and commentaries, and her research has been cited in the Huffington Post, Health, 3 amicus briefings in the Supreme Court of the United States, and 2 National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine reports, data visualization project entitled How to Fix Maternal Mortality. The first step is to stop blaming women. That was published in 2019, Future of Medicine edition of Scientific American. Her work appeared in publications such as Dame Magazine, Politico, NPR, and she made a voice appearance in Terrence Nance's HBO series Random Acts of Flyness. She's the recipient of numerous awards, currently serves as chair-elect for Sexual and Reproductive Health section of the American Public Health Association. She was in as a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing in 2019. It honestly is an honor to have you join us today, and I will for the floor. Welcome, Dr. McLemore.
Thank you so much for having me. There's so many friends and colleagues and collaborators and folks, and it's so good to see folks from Guttmacher and folks from, your school and New Yorkers who I love. And I have a special thanks to Dr. Lynn Roberts, my teacher, my mentor, my friend. I wish I could be there with you in person. I feel like I was saying earlier, I feel like I've been in New York City all day, even though I'm in Oakland, California, because the National Women's Law Center started running with the call about the Supreme Court of the United States SCOTUS. So actually my research findings will now be in 4 amicus briefs. I got to update my, was cited for the case that will be in front of the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the 3rd challenge to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act for November 10th, a week after the election. I am so grateful to get a chance to talk with you, and apologize to anyone who was in my previous call with NYU Langoon this morning, morning my time, afternoon yours. My first couple of slides are very similar. We're on that call. Get a chance to hear more about reproductive justice, which informs all of my work, and the incredible Black women who developed it. I think about 33, 35 slides. I wanted to leave about 20 to 25 minutes for discussion because I think I talk about is really bold. I think it is provocative and purposively so. I'll also think it's quite practical. And I hope to spawn, some new ideas about our current environment. So let me just say a couple of things. Number one, the times men are not normal, so we have to own that and we have to model that. So if you've got kids, you've got camera, my dog walker will bring my dog back. We're all working at home, so let's just own that, right? If we can mute when we're not talking, if we can have one person speak at a time, that would be great. We can use function. You can email me publicly, privately. You have my consent to record this talk. You have my consent, screenshot my, you have my consent to post on social media. And I think we need to normalize consent, affirmative consent, because I think it's super important. I will try to use too many names, but if I do and I haven't defined them, please drop it in the chat and I'll try to do it in real time so you don't have to wait until the end. Want to also state that if you could go to the participants tab and please make sure that you edit your name so I know who you are. Mine's Monica, I use pronouns her, and I hope you can see that. If you could also put your pronouns in, that would be great, because as we continue to talk, I want to make sure that I refer to you appropriately and that we can have a great dialogue. So with that, my opening slide, you'll see I'm affiliated with a lot of organizations and a lot of institutions. Part of that is because I believe in organizations and institutions, and I think they're an essential component to how we move forward. That said, I will hold the tension right now. Our institutions are not performing in the ways in which we need them to. And given that they're made up by those of us who participate in them, we need to do better, and we actually have to start guiding them to lead. So I'm going to give you some tools to do that. Fundamentally, I have 3 bullets that I will takeaway points. So if you learn nothing from me, these 3 things are the things that are most crucial, and I'll walk you through them as I get through the. So I start every presentation, I started doing this in 2014, with a positionality statement on conflict of interest. I think that part of us, if we're going to get to work that is really, really authentic and accountable, that to be very in terms of our positionality in the context of this work. And, you know, my bio is one thing, but I have to point out that I was in 1999. All the work that I do is personal. And as a public health nurse, as a scholar, as a researcher, you know, being a 50 American is a very strange thing. And, you know, to not say that in the context of where, you know, we are watching unfold, I think would be disingenuous and inappropriate. And so for me, you know, I'm also, oddly enough, sabbatical. That started on September 1st, and they're supposed to go until March 28th, and I have never been more busy in my academic life. So as to think about making this all different, one of the things that I hope that we can get to is our positionality in terms of really knowing where we stand authentically and honestly, and to whom we are accountable. I want to start off with reproductive justice because it is, you know, that was in my biography. It is something that informs the work that I do. It is a crucial and essential part of my life, and I have deep gratitude for the Black women who pulled it together. I'll define it after I make this point, though. I've already talked about reproductive already today. I told you I was on a call with the National Women's Law Center. Language is very important to me. Words matter, and the meanings through which we use them have to really be clear. So reproductive rights are the legal protections that we put into place in society to guarantee our rights. It's really different than reproductive health services provision. You know, as a nurse, and it looks like I might be coming out of retirement because, of course, public health nurses are needed now more than, of course, I'm in California. Between the wildfires and the contact tracing, the need for the public health nursing workforce is really huge. But reproductive health services provision is different than reproductive rights. Reproductive justice is a completely different thing. It is a praxis, it is a strategy, a frame. It is a conceptual model. It is so many things. And, you know, for me, it's a very positivist approach, grounded in rights, developed by Black women in Chicago in 1994, that I think is the way forward. And so in order for me to get on the same, we have to talk about what reproductive justice is. And, you know, when I think in a country that was founded in a situation we were leaving a monarchy and leaving a theocracy, people forget that most of our rights are negative, right? The rights in the United States are free from government. That's a negative right, right? But what would it mean for us to think differently about positive rights? And that's the reasons why I love justice. When I think of, I'm not going to read it all, but when I think about the sort of underlying tenets, you know, this is very definition of reproductive justice, because there are people who are on this call who have had a broadening of reproductive justice. Like I can tell now, even in the sentence, you know, it's not just the human right to determine the conditions under which, you know, people will birth or become parents. It's also make family kin and how we make community. Dr. Roberts taught me that, right? It's also, it's not just the human right to decide not to become a parent, prevent pregnancy, or to end one with things with dignity and have it be completely accessible or available. It's to be able to name when, where, and how they'll happen. It's this dynamic, amazing theory grounded in human rights, really not so aspirational, but inspirational in terms of how we want to be able to organize not only our health services, but a political strategy, as well as a public health praxis to improve our rights, not only with ourselves, but also with the people that we serve. I feel very strongly about the need for us to have a very competent and nuanced about the fact that at some point we need to be sure that everyone is on the same page, that it is essential that we disassociate from reproduction. I think that there are just too many services, too many rights that are guaranteed, linking those two things together and not to be decoupled, and for a variety of reasons. And I think in order for us to be able to get to healthy, pleasurable sexuality, in order for us to consent, in order for us to have different conversations about how we engage with each other, we are going to have to appreciate and see sex reduction, and to be able to look at those things from a rights, from a health, and from a justice perspective, where they're not inextricably linked. So one of the things that I think is super important that we ask ourselves is, you know, you're a school of public health, right? There's a lot of academicians, clinical public health folks, you know, probably some policy people on this call. And we have to think about data. And one thing, whenever data that really is, a lot of times we will not talk about power. And I think we have both an ethical and a professional responsibility begin to start to understand that not only are there power dynamics when we think about the value of data, but there's also a resource location that goes along with that power. So that when you're talking about allocating humans or money or time, you really have to think about where are the different power dynamics. I just shared the how does it show up in specific environments that will influence how we think about achieving health equity. So these are my three takeaways. I'm gonna interrupt before I get to the third one, because sometimes I'm very accustomed to having people be all on the same page, but I don't make that this group. You're such a dynamic school, you're a large school, there's a lot of people that are on this call, and so I wanna do some level setting. If you are not familiar with Futures, started by Alicia Garza, one of the three Black women queer co-founders of the Black Lives Matter hashtag on Twitter. And in the years, they created what they call the Black Census Project, and they surveyed 30,000 Black Americans in the United States to really, really understand our engagement, not only with the political process, but how we thought and think about important issues of our day. And my number one takeaway from Futures Lab is that we need to get more familiar with the priorities of the people that we serve. I personally think there is a current disconnect between the people what the people we serve need, what we're offering in reproductive health and in reproductive rights. So let me give you some background for the quantitatively scientists on the N on the respondents was 30,000 Black Americans representing all 50 states. Range was 89 years old. Interestingly, the median age was lower than what's estimated by the US Census, difference between years old versus 3 years old. 60% identifying as women, and a purpose of oversampling for LGBTQIA individuals, gender norming folks, and folks with different sexual orientations, and these were specific categories purposively developed with those in the to be able to appropriately capture different data from different constituencies and to be able to conduct the kind of analyses that they're still right now. And you know, highly educated sample, but again, this shouldn't surprise folks since we know that Black women are the highest holders of great degrees in the States, and given the large number of Black women that were in the census, that it shouldn't be surprising that 1/5 of the sample had a degree of Black or higher. What did they find? I'm pulling out 3 figures from a report that's publicly available on the Black Futures Lab website. I want to to the fact that only 16% of the 30,000 respondents who represented all 50 states really identified not having any electoral at all. This is a highly politically involved group of Americans. And quite frankly, you know, the level of activity, you know, is highest in the highest amount of electoral activity. When you think about the most pressing problems, this survey was fielded in 2018. The data were released in 2019. So this was pre-COVID, right? When you think about the most pressing problem, it will not probably surprise this group of researchers and scholars and activists and students and learners and clinicians that low wage, not enough to sustain was number 1, and that lack of affordable health care was number 2 at 77%. So to me, it is very striking that we're yet again a Supreme Court challenge to the Affordable Care Act in a month and a couple of days, when it seems overwhelmingly to me that people that I'm very interested in having affordable health care and having enough wages to be able to ensure they can sustain their family. College debt and affordable housing very closely. When you drill down even more in the questions around what's the government role in solving economic problems, anyone who watched the debates last night, this was not it, right? The priorities of the people who are elected to represent us are disconnected from what the people actually want, right? 9% of the 30,000 Black Americans representing 50 states really felt that government should provide affordable and quality healthcare for all Americans. The takeaway, there is a huge disconnect between what the people we serve want and need and what we're actually offering. This is really important because we get to know, which is we have to own we're part of the problem. And generally, when I'm talking to clinical audiences, I'm talking about health providers and clinics, but this is actually also true in the context of public health. And you can't fix a problem if you can't name it, right? So I'm gonna have 2 really provocative statements. The first one is that, you know, clinician burnout and public health, you know, burnout is closely related to patient mistreatment. And let me say that again. Clinician burnout, public health burnout is actually with or related to patient mistreatment. And they've been studied as separate things. And unfortunately, I have to really put out there, at some point, we really have to examine my provocative. I think our workplaces are inhumane. And they don't work for either of us. They don't work for the people we serve, and they don't work and manifested in these sort of very interesting ways where we study things, but we are missing what I think is one of the core fundamental issues, which is our workplaces and they need to be. I don't just critique things without giving some offerings around how to fix them. So I'm gonna get to that, but let me show you some data. The Birthplace Lab is an operator with that try to cross public health and health services provision, led by a midwife and a colleague of mine, Dr. Vidam. One of my good colleagues, collaborators, and co-authors, Dr. Mimi Niles, who is in New York City with all of you and is a midwife at H. She did a postdoc with this lab. And we published this landmark paper in April that really showed that regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of age, 1 in 6 birthing people experience mistreatment during childbirth. That is shameful. To make this, you have to fix this. 1 in 6, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. Monica, what's mistreatment? Well, there are 10 domains of mistreatment that have been by the World Health Organization. We used that taxonomy to really try to determine mistreatment in the Giving Voice to Mothers survey. The top 4 in our study were being shouted at and or scolded at, ignoring and refusing requests for help, failing to request for help a reasonable amount of time, violation of physical privacy, and threatening to withhold treatment or forcing people to accept treatment they didn't, all this unconditional care. When we drilled down by race and ethnicity, we found that there were statistically significant relationships reported in Native Indigenous individuals reporting the most, and you can see the bars moving forward. I looked at these data purposefully open source in reproductive health because we wanted the communities from which we partnered with analyze, study, and collect these data to have direct access to the findings. You know, it was very sad when this came out. We got a lot of press because, you know, it was a nationally representative sample, and we had, you know, almost 3,000 respondents where, you know, almost 100 were Black identified individuals. And the study was oversampled, more than half were identified as people of color. And deduce, there's more data coming from the study, and there's more that's coming out, but I started this section of the talk to really talk about, we have to stop serve against the people who provide care, right? And this got played out really interesting in your state in March, early on, around, you know, accompanying birth and sort of the decree and the outcry around, oh, you can't have your partner, oh, you can't have a doula during your birth because we need, you know, to protect healthcare and we need PPE, right? Had we just admitted that our workplaces were inhumane and our public health response to COVID-19 was satisfactory, we could have teamed up with the people that we served and had a joint, you know, outcry around that PPE, but we could have had a different conversation about the places where people birth and how we could have remade those. And I worry that we actually have that goodwill that we could have spent then to really make this all differently. But I'm going to give you some ideas as to how we might be able to make that happen now. So midway through the first wave of what we call the California pandemic, I got asked to speak to the American College Districts and Ghana around, you know, this was right after George Floyd was murdered by the police. And they asked me to talk about what can we be doing and how thinking differently about wielding power. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and, you know, even within my own discipline, my own nursing is not doing much better than medicine. And it always drives me crazy because on the one hand, ever since 9/11, 20 years, nurses have been the most trusted health professions. And I keep asking people, when are we going to spend some of that currency, right? Physicians always want to lead teams, and they always want to be responsible, and yes, legally around, you know, malpractice and all those other kinds of things, they have to be leaders. I hate it when we all need leadership and then people are all of a sudden helpless. So they called me up and they were like, hey, really would love from you your, you know, most unabashed ideas around how we can really start to think about anti-racism in healthcare services provision. You help us. And so I spent a lot of time pulling together some ideas, and I went to my favorite acronym generator, because for people who know me, I couldn't find an affirmative word to use to describe the 5 tools I'm about to give you. And when the word that kept coming out was, and I was like, I guess that's kind of appropriate given where we are. So I'm going to run with that. I asked the American Journal of Nursing to publish that it could be widely available to individuals. And there also is a YouTube video that really sort of outlines this in an hour-long content, but I can give this to you so I can actually get you to how to think about achieving health equity and the strategies that me and my team are currently using to do this in the pandemic. And this came out a couple of days, well, God, I guess it's almost October, so maybe it wasn't a couple of days ago. Came out 1st of September. And SPLIT is an acronym that stands for Simulation, Public Health, Leading, Immersion, and Tension. I'll walk you because there's some very practical applications that go along with each letter. Public health is the perfect place, and you'll see in the slide that public is the next letter of split. But simulation is something that clinical health services providers are very accustomed to in the reproductive justice space. There's been a lot of work looking at, bundles and hemorrhage simulations to manage heavy bleeding, and simulation anti-racism. And I keep asking folks who dove right into their anti-racism book club, are we ready to practice those skills that you learn in the so really have some playgrounds to really work through and to really start to use the tools that people have read about, advertise them, operationalize them, so that they aren't just abstract and they are not only theoretical. Because I continue to be concerned and worried that the only relation space around anti-racism is social media. And that can't be the only place where we have discussions or we try on ideas or we think about, anti-racist practice. We also can't leave this to our employers or the regulatory folks because there's a whole set of legal machinery that's steeped in racism that can't get us to the anti-racist future we're all trying to get to. And trying to hold professional organizations accountable for allowing us some of this play space. We have a virtual universe. We could be vulnerable as we want to be around trying to skill build in anti-racism. And so let me give you an exemplar. I had proposed last year an opportunity to do a bystander and an upstander training that where we could do some time disruption of some of the mistreatment that we found in our study, that we were going to break out different sessions as part of an 1.5-hour session, Association of Women Obstetric and Neonatal Nursing, or AWON. And it got accepted to be a pre-session, so we would have almost 3 hours to do this bystander training, professional meeting, with coaches and all sorts of other people. COVID-19 hits. The AWON meeting is usually in June. It's the last week of June. They made a decision in June to delay the meeting and to move it from Arizona, which at that time was a COVID-19 hotspot, and move the meeting to Vegas, Nevada. But then they decided to move the meeting to November 1st to November 3rd. And I wrote to the president of the board, executive director of the organization, and I said, are you really going to move your professional meeting, to a weekend in a city that is not uniformly integrated masking over the weekend of one of the most important elections in our nation? You're going to do that. I not do that. They decided not to move that date. So I withdrew our proposal and I will resubmit it for next year. Fortunately, that was an opportunity to create practice and play spaces for people to mess up, to try and do work, to try skills. But you can't decide to move your meeting to the weekend that covers the election. Right? Okay. Public health. When I'm talking to clinical audiences, I always lift up the work of Kamara Jones. I lift up the work of Donna Davis. I lift up the work of Lynn Roberts. I lift up the work of public health has been actually a little bit more vanguard than clinical health services provision in having tools and strategies. I mean, I was lucky enough to participate in an webinar series. I remember when Dr. Kamara Jones made it her public health presidency platform to address racism as a right? And so there's modules, there's seminars, there's annual meetings. Our job is to disseminate and to share and to amplify. Talking to policymakers, when you're talking to policy audiences, when you're talking to clinicians, when you're talking to colleagues and collaborators, when you're at your professional organization, it is necessary to cite these tools and to make sure that other audiences and constituencies not only understand that they exist, but they be using them and developing simulation. Leading. About this, and in my world, truth comes before reconciliation. And we need some truth telling before we can start conversations about all of this. As a public health nurse, I am horrified that we have lost 200,000 Americans. Started nursing in 1988. And when I say this to students, they look at me and they're like, wow, Monica, really? Right? That was the height of yet another public health infectious emergency with a failed government response, where we let 625,000 Americans die. At least then we picked up. We had an AIDS Memorial Grove. We had an AIDS Memorial Quilt. We had like benefit concerts. There has been no truth around Americans and mostly Black and Latinx folks. None. And so I would push us to think about how can we commemorate what we've lost. As a nurse, this hurts my heart, right? These people are dead. And so we need to start thinking what kind of commemoration, what kind of acknowledgement, what do we need to put into place to pause and to recognize that loss. We need to do this collectively. And I am looking for all sorts of ideas. What kind of commemorations can we have? When I ask me about practical things, that's my big pie in the sky. I want us to have some kind of a commemoration and to stop acting like the economy is thing we care that makes it out of this pandemic, because it is changing us in ways that nobody is calling out. And we have got to stop and to pause, got to acknowledge. There are small things that we can do institutionally, personally. My out of office notices every time I go away from my life acknowledges either the death or the injustice of what's occurred on that particular day. And I can't tell you I've had, whether it was the unjust verdict, on behalf of Breonna Taylor, to the unfortunate death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm out of office and I'm on a sabbatical. I think we need to start normalizing our out of offices. Email signatures, right? People need to, I am a night, I will respond to your email at off hours. I expect you to respond when it's appropriate for you. I learned this as a night nurse. Nice on time, right? This whole idea that we're always at work all the time because our homes have become our workplaces. No, we got to stop normalizing that. We have to stop normalizing that, and we have to model that. If people don't want their camera on during Zoom, stop mandating that people do something, right? You all can use the chat to talk to me. You can use my social media. I consented for you to do all of those things. You can send me an email after this. This time urgent got to stop. These times are not normal, and we need to model that they aren't. That's the small listening, leading, acknowledging. Quite frankly, we need flexible workplace policies, right? People need to have a COVID-19 bank of time that they can use so they don't have to use their vacation time, be out. Need to be out and no notes required. People need generous time off without question. We have to create paths, employees, our Indigenous, our Latinx folks to advance within our organizations, and they need to know that that's an option. Yes, now, even during a pandemic, know that they have access and opportunity to our educational institutions, and we will support them in that journey. That's the medium. What's the law? My university and the School of Nursing has been lucky enough to do this. Guaranteed employment, no layoffs, no furloughs. Tell staff, tell faculty that. Tell the people we contract with that. I've had grant officers tell me, Monica, don't worry about your report this year. You got next year. We know it's a weird time. That's the kind of reassurance. That to me is institutional mutual aid. We need some, what is School of Public Health, what's your institutional mutual aid? Right? We need to be thinking about those kinds of reassurances, those kinds of how are we going to hook each other up? How are we all going to help each other out of this? That's leading, right? And start, if you have to start small, if you have to move, you're ready to move the meeting. If you have to move large, there are other ideas that I haven't thought about that I have not put on here. But this is the kind of thinking that we need. Immersion. We have to be ready to fail and redirect, right? We have to learn, we have to run, taught. We have to normalize saying things like, thank you for helping me see where I've been wrong or how my racism shows up in our work. You know, thank you so much for really, really being courageous in saying that thing you just said. We have, if we're going to change culture, right? We have to help and hire and fund Black, Indigenous people of color and queer folks for their expertise. The exemplar I always use to translate this own university, I can put a percentage of effort from myself on my grants. And yet in my community engagement work, you don't want me to pay people a living wage for their expertise? What with you? I have had, and we are now working with our institutional review board because we understand the harms of research where people can be financial persons participating into research studies. But in my mind, I think that needs a reimagination in the context of a global pandemic that's going to spawn a recession, where we've already 28,000 are being laid off from Disney this morning, and we're waiting for the airlines tomorrow that we already bailed out in March. I think we might need some rethinking around these. I also think affinity groups are necessary, but there have to be necessary accountability supports to be put in. Right? And what affinity groups is by putting people together either by race or by ethnicity, by age, whatever makes sense. But we have got out greatly accountable to each other while not also being, you know, having a disproportionate amount of burden to figure this out. I don't know what that looks like. I'm open to suggestions. But right now, for me, affinity groups is what we've come up our team, and we're really trying to make sure that those groups can then be accountable to each other. So this is a place where I really think immersion is probably this link of how I'm really thinking about how actionable things that we can do. So I'm open to suggestions and feedback to all of these pieces up. T is the hardest, which is why it's last. This comes from Jungian psychology, talked about holding a tension of opposites. I love that phrase. And every time, you know, I think about it, it for me exemplifies only one of the, you know, tenets of reproductive justice, where we talk about, we don't have to succumb to either or thinking, but we can be a both and. But you have to have a tension of opposite. And here's how it goes. Right? When I'm speaking to clinical experts, they feel so frustrated that they're novice in racial justice. Right? And the analogy, I always use a personal analogy, right? When I started my PhD, I had already a nurse for 25 years. I was an expert nurse. I could put your IV in with my eyes closed 12 miles from where you were actually receiving care, right? I'm one of those upside down. But I was a novice researcher. And that tension was really hard, right? Of knowing I was an expert nurse, but being a learner, student, being a novice in something I was trying to learn, which at that time was genomic work because we were mapping the human genome. And I was interested in tumor markering in cancer, right? So it's very interesting to clinically know how to help and manage and be able to treat patients who were receiving cancer treatment. To feel as a researcher, that was a tension of opposites I had to hold, because the truth of the matter that I had to admit to myself was my clinical expertise could and guide my dissertation work, but it was irrelevant when it came to trying to understand methods, theories, and how to conduct ethical research, and I had a lot to learn. This is where I think we're really getting stuck, because some people directly translate authority and responsibility and expertise in one domain. They think they can translate that to another. And that actually, it doesn't work because there's skills. And so we have to hold that tension of opposites. So unfortunately in English, word for you singular and the word for you plural is the same word. But, you know, I make the distinction between you singular and us collectively by putting it in all caps. You know, so how can we make this all different, and what part will you, meaning so that you in French as opposed to two, right? Possessive. How are we all going to make this different? I'm going to use an exemplar for this. comes from the Black Mamas Matter Alliance. We have a forthcoming paper that reconceptualizes the conduct of research performed by Black mamas. And we use a conceptual framework to really understand how we do our work. If you currently don't have a conceptual framework, I would in a pandemic to open up PowerPoint and use the smart art, clip art, to draw a picture of what you theoretical underpinnings of the work that you do. It is a very liberating experience to have to put that down pictorially, and that's valuable, important. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about emancipatory community engagement, because if you've already heard my take number one, to get familiar with the priorities of the people that we serve. And if you accept my premise of take home message number two, that owning we are part of the problem, can't fix problems, we name it. Then part three, if we're really going to make this different, then we have to do something differently, because what we're doing right now isn't working. And I think different emancipatory community engagement. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So when first hit, a lot of people threw a lot of money, and quite frankly, by my count, there are now 8 pregnancy-associated RHE&BJs looking at COVID-19 during pregnancy. And the reason that there are 8 is because we have learned from other infectious disease and pregnancy, Zika, H1N1, MERS, SARS, Ebola, HIV, as I mentioned earlier, that pregnant people can be particularly to infectious disease. And we don't have a lot of information about how to not only take care of pregnant people, but how to assist them in their health. And quite frankly, research on people with the capacity for pregnancy has been underfunded forever, since the beginning of time, despite being half the population. And so and I say this, as to a group of colleagues who are public health researchers, if we had public health infrastructure, nobody would be writing grants during a pandemic. And yet I still wrote 5. And part of that really had to do with the fact that the RHE&BJ, one of them at the time when I heard that they were being set up, including the 3 at UCSF and the 2 in New York City, the one at Sinai, and the one them had any community engagement components to them. And I sat there and thought to myself, with all the years of health disparities research and all the years, that people has been in existence, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and all the best practices that we know from community-based participatory action research, I understand we're a pandemic. I understand Black Americans continue to be murdered by police. But to think that you would not set up from the beginning community engagement work and knowledges and methodologies to be able to put that in place, in my opinion, right now is shameful. So what did my team and I decide to do? We decided to develop and how to not only do this virtually, but also to be able to do it in a model that could be widely spread. So we decided to develop the Reproductive and Birth Justice to be available to registries for pregnancy. The one registry we spend most of our time with is Priority. It's the Outcomes Registry, which is looking at people who were COVID-19 positive or people who were suspicious under investigation of COVID-19. And we used an innovative method for online self-enrollment or physician referral. You could use phone, use social media. You could enroll straight through the website. There are multiple questionnaires that will be provided depending on enter during pregnancy. You could have up to 7 questionnaires. We're remunerating participants. It doesn't matter how your pregnancy ends, as you COVID-19 or you are a person under investigation for COVID-19, you could enroll. And so we really added on, in the registry to collect those data. We were like, okay, well, how are we going to get those data back to communities from which, we drew those data? How can we create a community-generated big data set? And then how can we get questions answered of the data that community members are interested in? So it's my team. I'm lucky enough to work with some of the most incredible reproductive health rights and justice researchers in the country. And also really grateful that they're all Black women. And, for me, it was very important for us to conceptualize how to think about these in a virtual environment during a global pandemic at a time when, racist behavior, and particularly the murder of Black people, was receiving national attention. How could we do this in a way that was both accountable and engaged, while also holding the tension opposites that a West Coast university should not be receiving millions of dollars to distribute to community-based organizations led by Black country, right? Tension of opposites. So what we did was we said, wait a minute, first of all, you have no racism, no poverty on your, you have no experiences of having COVID while Black and while birthing. We need some new survey items. So we went ahead and did that. Assembled 21-person community advisory council from across the country, quite frankly. And it was interesting, opened up the opportunity to participate in the community advisory council in April. We received 157 applicants. 98 of them were complete, and we had to select, and it was very difficult. We had to select 21 people to serve on that council. We paid them $125 an hour, and we really asked them to go through the survey item. We consult them for everything, whether it's the surveys, to communicating with the registry team. Right now, one of the big pushes that we requested from them is recruitment, because when we first started the study, we wanted 1,500 individuals, and we got in the first 500. We realized that those participants who enrolled in the study were white, and that half had incomes over $100,000 a year. We realized that our methodology was all wrong, because we were only enrolling pregnant healthcare workers, physicians and nurses who were pregnant as COVID hit. And that would not be representative of the people that we wanted to serve. So the Community Advisory Council helped us to revamp and retool recruitment. They helped us to really develop survey questions that were really, really important, to the communities from which they come. Developed a social traditional media toolkit. And next month, which is actually tomorrow, we will launch national listening tours in multiple geographies to hear the important questions that Black, Indigenous people, color, and queer folk actually want to be answered from registry data. And we'll be deploying them in 8 states around the country. If you look at if you want to see the pictures and the bios of our community council, or justice.sf.edu, because not only do we pay them, we treat them like our co-researchers. We ask them for a headshot and a bio. We put them on their website. In our minds, they are just as expert as we are. You will notice these are the states from which our Community Advisory Council come from, and you will notice I'm not represented in the state where you are is only represented by New York City. We wanted people from around the country who were emerging hotspots in June, July. And so that's who we really felt should be driving some of this work. Again, how do you concretize, or how do you operationalize justice and social justice in your research? Be prescient enough to know that you need to center the places that are most burdened, right? If we really believe a fundamental public health principle that Dr. Kamara Jones taught me, it's if we center the people who are most burdened, then care should improve for everybody. Let me say that again. If we center the people who are most burdened, then technically care, if we really believe, policies and practices should improve for everyone. So that's why our Community Advisory Council comes from places where the hotspots come from, places that are mostly burdened, especially states that didn't expand Medicaid under the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. That was good. We did get applications from California. And yes, we did get applications, from other states. But we wanted to be sure that we use principles making our selection and determinations about whose voices should be prioritized. So again, going back to the slide I started, how are we going to demand differently from journals and publications, from policymakers, people who implement policy, from public health departments, from our academic institutions, from all of those? How are we going to talk about power? How are we going to change activities? How are we going to change our policies, procedures, and practices? And when and where are we immediately going to start some around make all of this differently? Because in my mind, this is a collective effort. I'm trying to seed ideas about how we can feeling so in these moments and start acting, because I really believe that direct action and bold direction that's collective and that amplifies and is not competitive is what we really need right now to make all of these things different. See my email, myself everywhere on social media. I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see people, and I see there's a ton of comments and questions in the chat. I want to thank you for listening, and I will answer almost any question or comment that you have about this presentation or other things that it's about. And when I can't answer you, then I will tell you that. So Dr. Grove, thank you for having me, and can I open it up, or are there things you'd like to say to you?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this presentation, and it's, you know, different from what you were going to present because of everything, so incredibly timely for the moment. And you know, we can pretend that we planned this whole thing out to begin with, but we didn't. But I'm happy that you know, we're doing this now in this moment, and you know, we've got the right person at the table to do it. So I just wanted to say thank you for to come out and see us here in New York today. And I'm a Zoom newbie, so I'm less familiar. When you know, at one we have 9 people on. So
well, I'll take the chat. And again, reminder: you can tweet at me, you can send me notes on Facebook, you can send me an email. After this, if you're not ready to talk, that's okay too. You can unmute yourself. If you do, please tell me your name, the pronouns that you use, and sort of whatever your question or your suggestion is. This is not a panacea. It's not an end-all be-all. I share it so it can be built out. We need better ideas. We need more ideas. And I, you know, will stop talking now to look through the questions. But if you want to unmute yourself and say anything, please do. And if there's silence, I'll go ahead and start some of these questions because there's a lot.
And we'll open the floor in the meantime. If anybody has an immediate question, please, you know.
Let me answer the immediate ones first. Yes, you'll have access to my PowerPoint. It's too big to email. I'll send a Dropbox link. Organizers, I believe this is being recorded, so you'll also have access to that. I completely concur with the person who said we need a national moment of silence. I wrote in DNICE and doing Club Quarantine, and I'm trying to figure out who are the big people who could actually cause a national pause for us to really acknowledge what's happened. So if I get a response from a lot of people to say, can you please help us think around what kind of acknowledgement of this moment where we're at to really mark it in a way memorable? So I'll let you know how that goes. Thank you, Elizabeth Trainer, for the question. Since you sent it to everybody, I mean, since I'm gonna read it. Is there a toolkit that we can reference on how to institute or host anti-racism simulations at our organization? That is a great idea. Put into the there's one tool we've developed at UCSF. We are still piloting it. It has not had a rigorous evaluation, but structure itself. It is I believe, it was developed by Dr. Zoe Julian, who is a Black, queer, identified, badass, and smart soon to be board certified OBGYN. And it is open to the public. Why can't I not? Let's see. Why can't I? It's very strange. I will get that link. It looks like, I don't know why I can't type in the chat. Oh, wait, there we go. Here's the link. We are testing this as a simulation tool. So if you really want to start to think about that, integrate that into your simulation, I'm happy to share the abstract that I wrote around the upstander training. You know, our who study partner violence and who do direct service delivery for domestic and interpartner violence, they've had bystander and upstander trainings for years, right? So we don't have to recreate this. That's where this comes from, right? They've really developed ways to diffuse situations and to really help experiencing home to stay safe. They have a whole toolkit around that. You just have to translate it to our environment, right? So for me, you know, this whole idea, this thought, or how do we think about simulation? I mean, there are so many ways to think about this. And you know, me one day actually like going through my CPR, I was like, now they have virtual like simulations that you have to do, and it looks almost like a game to like pump the heart. And it's like there's so many things that we could be thinking about how to give people the skills that they need so that in real time you don't, you know, a lot of people are fight or flight folks. I'm a freeze person. When stuff happens, I freeze. And what upstander and has allowed me to recognize when I'm freezing and to help me to unfreeze myself. And so as you're thinking about your own environment, own work, I put the link in the chat. I'll make sure that it sends the organizers, but there are so many places to riff on how could we do better building and for individuals. We just need to also have a practice space, because I think it can't just be, you know, social media professional organizations. I think we could integrate it into our work. We could talk about, like, we could have somebody drop a microaggression, or we could have somebody, you know, something where they put their foot in the mouth, and then we can pause, and then we can walk through all the different steps that we would want to develop, right? We already know we would want everything that's going on, to acknowledge what was said. We would want somebody to facilitate, moderate, whatever, right? And then there's a rupture process that comes. But I mean, I don't know what works in everyone's environment. I can tell you what works in ours. And that to me is where we're spending some energy and then operationalizing it. So let's not just design simulate, let's actually use it. Right? Let's not spend a lot trying to create the book club without actually giving people a direct application to be able to use that. Let's see. Joining in the Community Advisory Council. Okay, so that's a great question. We are building our plane and flying it at the same time. I've never been to National Advisory Board. I have always had local and regional ones. My work is very community engaged, is very much in Oakland. You know, I have like partners. I work with the Duke. I go Red Bay Coffee Roasters because they're the Black-owned coffee people. Like I go hang with the region. So this is my first time pulling together advisory, and we are funded to create this body for 2 years. At some point, I hope they realized, and right, because in my mind, having a community advisory council from the beginning should be a best practice. So one of the things my university and my institution has done is we have a translation and science institute at our university, CTSI. We have what we call a PCAB, Public Community Advisory Board, where we pay people $125 an hour for their expertise to review lay summaries of internal grants and right? So during COVID-19, a group of investigators chipped in money so that CAB could be so that they could review more COVID-19 related responses that were coming forward, so that they could all get some level of review, even a basic science paper, right? Then we went to our institutional review board and said that the IRB would not sign off on for any, regardless of level of approval needed, whether it was exempt, expedited, or full review study, without having some level of community review. So extra money from the chancellor so that the Community Advisory Council could read a 1-paragraph layperson summary before the IRB could. We leveraged all the existing infrastructure to be able to try and get that community advisory input. Our CTSI, which is equal to UCSF, rotates off every 2 years. We are thinking we might do that for this National Advisory Council, spread it based on where COVID moves. But we literally, like I have a retreat about this on Saturday. We are going to think about how to best do this because no one's at a national advisory board for a specific type of research study, right? PCORI has outcome research, has advisory councils and standards for community engagement, but they still are regionally focused. They're not national. I would love some ideas how we should be thinking about rotating people up. We brought on our CAC all at once. We don't want them all to leave it. So at some point, we have to think about changing their charter so that some people can stay on for a third year when we bring people on in year 2, so that we don't lose all that community wisdom or that instilled. But maybe we might want to bring on a whole other group of people, right? We're trying to think of what is the best practice in this. I don't know. I'm open to partnering with folks who want to think about it, right? I have this on the agenda so that we can discuss this at the Black Mamas Matter Alliance meeting, because I don't know what the best practice is to maintain a community advisory council, especially in this environment. But I mean, we have 2 legislators from New Mexico actually participating on the Community Advisory Council because we needed their expertise and their guidance, because they have a community advisory board that reviews all this that come through in New Mexico. And their community advisory board works with the community-based organization that's indigenous and run, allows for them to be able to get those proposals in the hands of the right people so they can identify red flags, they can identify historical, and work can be partnered in real time to improve those research proposals. So I'm open, I'm listening, trying to really think about how we can do this well. We're building this plane and flying it. And again, for me, it's been exciting, right? Because I get to be a novice researcher to think about the next frontier of community engagement. There's folks asking how you can access the recording because they're not any, I can't question, but go UNC Greensboro, because one of my good friends, Selena Phipps, did her baccalaureate degree there in public health. Let's see.
Answer the question about the recording. It's going to be posted to the School of Public Health's Facebook page for those that follow the School of Public Health on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you much for that. Let's see. I see and would argue most professional space, a lot of what you propose is radical. Really? Maybe I'm just hanging out with the right. Any advice on how to quell the fears and hesitation of decision makers, leaders who see these ideas and actions as too radical, impossible, not feasible to present critical mass to push for this type of agenda forward? I have a million things I can say about that. Oh, and we've got good times, I'm saying. Number one, last 16 to 24 weeks have taught us nothing. It's that you can propose something radical. So number one, realize we tested a basic minimum income with our citizens, in March when everybody received their $1,200 check that was eligible. We actually tested that. Not sure, right? Do we realize that prior to COVID-19, we wanted to see, telehealth services enhanced happen, didn't happen, and all of a sudden, right? So for me, I think messenger matters. I wish it didn't, but racism makes sense, so it is a thing. So who's providing that message matters. How it's packaged and how we relate it to others that people can really wrap their head around, I think is helpful. So here's one strategy. How many people really thought, when Americans with Disabilities Act was first introduced, I remember all the grousing that folks made about it because we were making accommodations. And the one big remember really grumpy about the sidewalk ramps. Everybody was all in a tizzy around it. How many times now, I see more in the sidewalk than wheelchair users. I see old ladies with their grocery cart. How about the skateboarders? Oh, and by the way, the moms with the baby strollers. That ended up a lot of, like, everybody, right? So why can't we use that as a story to say that when we centered the people who had need the wheelchair user. Now people don't even think about using the ramp on the sidewalk. We need allegories. We need stories people understand. What I'm saying actually really isn't that radical, right? It really isn't. It is one of those situations. I'm working on a paper to help explain to folks. Because I also sit in a position of, if you're in power and you're one of the hard people that we have to convince, then maybe you're not wielding power in this moment and maybe be leading. But that's where I sit, right? But I also think that at some point we need a process to determine who's on a continuum. The way that I think about this continuum is, some people want to retrofit what we already got, which means it'll stay in existence, but we're going to make some changes, but not really structural. Some people want to reform, right? That's more of a medium kind of approach. And then some people want to reimagine. They are all in on Team Utopia. Let's up. We do it. And what where we get gummed up is, I don't think we all are talking about the same thing. Because on the one hand, if you want folks to still feel power, but have a discussion about centering the people who are most burdened, they just want to retrofit what they already got. Okay, then how do we do that? So for me, more of a around, if we want to call ourselves healers, and if we want to call ourselves caregivers, we need a collective decision. What should remain, right? What has come up and what has happened that we want to stay permanent? Well, the fruit on that, right? That cat's out the bag, y'all. Next time somebody asks me to come in person to a meeting somewhere I don't want to go, I'm gonna be like, that's out the bag, right? Or the idea that some people can't work from home. We're gonna be on real shake, trying. So how can we be strategizing and thinking about, this is the incrementalist approach, and people who are on, and Team Utopia, this will make you bristle because it's incremental, right? But we need to be able to own those wins at the incremental stages. How to translate this to make sure that it's not that radical, because we can tie it back to things that we all been living with. Parents should be in an outage, right? And they're trying to do their jobs and trying to school their kids. This is impossible, right? But I always use that as an exemplar as to why we don't the sort of same advocacy, level that we do, say, in oncology, where I was trained, right? It's because you got the most tired people who are trying to, the largest role transition they will ever make in their entire lives, also trying to navigate being alive and being a human and maintaining a relationship with another person who's the exact same. And y'all actually think these people have free time to then come out and advocate for what they deserve. How to create this, that a thing, right? So for those of you who are in leadership, who might be on Team Rich, or who might be on Team Reform, how can we all package this, or think about this, or put it in an incrementalist way or place that will to get to where we're trying to go, right? How can we support those everyday movements to really move to how it's differently? Because the truth of the matter is, and this is something that I personally do. One of the reasons why I create office, have my signatures, like I'm a tenured professor on sabbatical, because I can, and it makes space for other people to feel comfortable. So you have to model the behavior that we want to be able to see in other places. People ask me why I publish so much. Well, because it affords me some in the current environment, so that when I start talking about reimagining things, people don't think I have the legitimacy to do so. So the thing about, and do we need a critical mass? I would actually question that. I would actually really question whether or not critical mass. I think it's the ethical thing to do, and I think it's the important thing to do. But at some point, the leadership of Black women, and with Black Americans being 14% of the population, I don't know that we're ever going to have a critical mass. And I can't stop me from thinking that we can make this different, because that's not how history works. So for me, I mean, I don't know. interesting, maybe my sense of radical is deeply transformed in our current environment. But I think the rules for radical have changed in the context in which we find ourselves. I actually really think that that's significantly changed. And because we have such a dearth in leadership, remember how Walker was going to let me know about it? See, I'm just going to walk and go let him in. But we have to begin to think about, if people in power start to behave normally, it is impossible for me, for those behaviors not to become institutionalized and normalized. Thank you. Hey, big girl. So to me, you know, I think that courage is important. And I think, what levers can we help us to do some of this work? I see somebody put the Joint Commission in the chat. And my question is, what are our regulatory agencies right now? And what can we make, what kind of asks can we make of them, right? Because on the one hand, my experience has been that, you know, they are watching our federal agencies be discredited in ways that I'm not sure a lot of us could have done. And they're cautious. At the same time, you know, the Joint Commission has a huge stick that they could be using. So what ask would we make of them, you know, to assist us in pushing an agenda forward actually gets us closer to health equity, right? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would love to sort of think about that with people. I love that people are putting like Netflix stuff and other stuff in the chat. Thank you very much, because, you know, I'm getting my screen. I can, you know, because I think it's important. Oh, there's a question in here about LARC. So, in reproductive core, also working to capture perspectives of people who are trying to avoid pregnancy too. Absolutely. There are abortion specific and contraception related questions. Morning after pill. I was very my language when I said, and I had the slide up around the priority pregnancy registry, that we were capturing people and they were eligible regardless of pregnancy ends. That was purposive, because we don't expect that birth is the only legitimate outcome to a Korean during a pandemic. So there is a question specific for LARC access. There's a question specific for medication of morning after access in the context of COVID-19. That said, my team and I don't view, we are through a reproductive justice lens. It's not a panacea for poverty, and it also is not a, you know, a decision that we operate on a national level as a strategy to, you know, sort of address what we perceive to be as a hostile climate to the people for pregnant. That's a decision that folks should make with their friends, family, community, and folks that they're accountable to. And, you know, that should be available them to be able to do those decisions. But we don't buy into the notion that that's a national strategy in some way. I don't really deal with that. How would you organizations evaluating birthing peoples by race or ethnicity? Well, first of all, you need to have birthing people who comprise those races and ethnicity on your research team. Them. And the truth of the matter is, outcomes by race or ethnicity, I think, is tricky. And we talked about this in health in terms of, you got to define race and how you're using it in the study. And as an analytic variable, I would hope that you would have some insights into you make if you decide either try and predict something using a regression model, or if you're going to stratify by race or ethnicity, there's reasons to do that for different, but you got to tell and how and why it's being used. So I think we've just been too lazy when we think about how people use race and ethnicity in research to not allow, we've not demanded, reviewers and editors have not demanded people explain its use. And so I think we need to do some retrofitting. And I'm hoping to create a repository where, again, there should be a journal editors and journal reviewers pre-session at an annual meeting to talk people through how to do this, right? This is a prime topic for somebody to be able to present on. So you want to become a journal reviewer, and so you want to become a journal editor. Here's how the speciesism is on. Somebody needs to propose that. You know, I might do it, but I'm gonna. Could you talk a little bit more about your immersion slide? Kind of a deep. How do you think we can empower those who have been lost hope through immersion? I don't think it's possible to empower other people. If you do, then that means power and you have to transfer it to them. So the way I think about this is you have to create the environment for which all people can bring their power forward, right? That's a culture change. Not me transferring to you. So to me, immersion's tough because I don't know your culture, right? And it has to be like, again, it goes back to place space. It has to be regionally specific. It has to be tailored to what your environment is. Some environments are hostile and toxic. Some environments are less so, right? So I can't prescribe to you what it would mean to create an environment where other people can bring their power forward. I can give you some strategies on how to help that happen. Number one, if you're in leadership, who are you to? And other people know that that's your accountability partner or partners. Number two, do people have a way to anonymously provide you feedback about how you're a leader? You might want to think about that. Three, right? Not that my door is always open. I'm talking other ways to be able to elicit feedback that are open and not just some one and done thing, right? I actually keep a Qualtrics survey so that if I need some feedback, don't want to name to, they can send that to me. I send that link to all learners and all folks that are associated with me because I completely appreciate the fact that not everybody will want to have a conversation. Not everybody's going to send me an email. Right? So I have to create the environment through which people feel like they can be authentic and honest with me. I apologize to be wrong. I have to pass the mic when it's really important to do so. I have to model the behavior that I'm looking to see in the youth I want to get to clear that I'm on Team Retrofit. Right. So for me, it's a very different way of thinking about how you organize your life and your work time with infrastructure. And I don't know how inhumane yours is. Ours is pretty bad, but it's because we're academic medical center and I sit in a school that historically has to deal with the healthcare hierarchy structure, right? There are 2,000 faculty in the School of Medicine. There's 136 in the School of Nursing. So just to give you, right? And so for me, it depends. Some of this is so regional, but then some of these strategies are just so universal that it will depend on how you want to apply them to your current environment. I want to get to these as possible. My experience leadership keep wanting to look at the medical reasons for disparities and request more research on, which is why I take a weird equation. And again, actual change, like the simulations you discuss, also partnering with community org seems like a challenge. Well, then maybe your institutional way of making changes to make it easier for community-based organizations to participate with you. I mean, isn't that a problem that you need to fix? Right? I mean, retrofit you now to actually make that a thing, if it's not a thing, because I think that is super important. For people who have most, and I say this because I'm the 5th Black tenured person in the 115-year history of my school, we have to have a commitment to the future to diversify our faculty. So faculty still it looks, when I'm long gone and dead, then that's a problem we didn't start to retrofit in the here and now. So we have to make this in the here and now that will get us to that utopia. And that means, we make a commitment to faculty hires. So in state, whatever year, we're going to be tenuring the 25th person, right? But we can't just turn around and think that automatically that's going to happen, especially when a Black person is tenured every 25 years, because there's only been 5 of us. So, there's some in real time retrofitting that does need. Let's see, birth. Oh, okay. That was a shout out. Thank you. 2020 has been a year of a lot of, one of the International Year to Nurse and the Midwife. Oh, somebody remembered that? You are a wonderful model, clinical academic, and we have work to do within nursing. What are your thoughts on a national chief nursing officer in the U.S. public health space, and how likely is it to happen? Well, WHO actually finally reinstated the chief nursing officer when he announced the. Now, I'm not going to try and talk too much insider baseball around nursing here, but he did reach that position at the UN and the WHO level. In the United States, we have never had a chief nursing officer. We've always had a surgeon general, and I've always had, because that's a thing, and that helps to reinforce healthcare hierarchy. And the only time we did have a nurse in that position was Sylvia Trent Adams before Jerome, no relation because last name, was named. Dr. Jerome Adams was named as a Surgeon General, and she was an interim because she was the highest ranking officer, health officer in the U.S. Preventative Health Force, and she was for 4 months. I think we need to have a bigger conversation about that, right? I mean, I think with the discrediting of science, going back to, if bots, Nazis, and trolls are the only people that are speaking on social media and they have the attention of the public, then we have a problem, and we can't bitch and complain when we're not on social media combat messages. But that's a whole other lecture that I could give at another time. And so I do think public scholarship has to be an essential part of what we have to translate our work to the public. Another reason why I wrote so much, you didn't hear that I had 61 peer-reviewed manuscripts. You heard I had reviewed manuscripts and blogs. And right now, actually, that number is 72. I have to increase it. It's because I have to translate that work to the public. I mean, people forget that NIH, NCF, or, NSF, CDC, those are tax dollars. Actually, that's our money, and anybody who works who pays income tax, public. So it's on us for science communication to be able to translate that work to the public, so that again they know we're credible information and can have those critical thinking skills to be able to make determinations, as a citizenry. So to me, that's a thing. I would love to go back and choose another year for the nurse and the midwife, frankly, because this is just a mess. But that's okay, because it's going to be different whether we do it or not. See, that's the other thing that people don't understand. When I talk about making things differently, it's going to be different whether we do anything or not. The question is what play in that difference. And for me, I expect to play a big one, because this has to be different, right? This future deserves better. The people in the present deserve better. And so if we can get more people to believe, to understand, to act, to strategize, to wield in their own domains, and if we all amplify and not compete, we actually can do this. I fundamentally believe in my genome. For me, it's more of an idea of, even if I've seeded some radical idea amongst one person that's on this call, 100, I can't believe that many people were on it, and let alone still are, then how can we think about this differently? How can we really do some of the fundamentals of what we need to wrestle with, right? And how, what do we need? Do we need new courses? Do we need new continuing education? Do we need new partnerships, right? Are there different things that we need in order to be able to, like, all of this is a thing? What is the IHI doing? I mean, we already talked about Joint Commission. What's IHI doing? All these institutions that wielded all this power over us, pandemic, and who's asking that question? I can't be the only person that's asking that question, right? Who's going to talk to the philanthropists, right? How many of y'all have talked to your program officers since COVID-19 hit to make sure that they made it very clear that their Black, Indigenous, people of color portfolio, if they had any, shouldn't have to worry about a grant renewal, right? There's little things we could be doing right now. Who has journal editors to your board that maybe perhaps we need to invite articles around anti-racism simulation? We need to. So we're, even in your own universe, everybody wants to fix the broader universe that's behind me, but we're in our own universe. Have we actually, like, made mental changes that we would like to see? Because you can't tell me of all these people on this call, there's not journal editors and articles and people who have relationships with philanthropists and all. Have we asked of them yet? So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. It is, if enough of us are demanding different and demanding, at least those of a little modicum of power, that we have, then how can we do this differently? And how can we learn the staff who have incredible ideas, but probably don't have any mechanism to bring them forward, right? How do we do that? I'll tell you, I mean, and I give credit where credit is due. It was a learner that told me, Dr. McLemore, you're intimidated. I think I'm the go-to person on the planet, let's be clear. And I said to her, I said, what would help you to be able to talk with me in a way that's useful? She said, do you take anonymous feedback? I said, sure. That's what started the Qualtrics link, where people could drop stuff in and could just say things to me that they probably wouldn't feel comfortable saying to me. And some of it has been very helpful. And I am sure knowledge that said it to me, I am sure to apologize publicly, whatever it is. I'm also sure to say that I'm to hearing how this can be different and how I should be doing this different and who I should thank and credit for letting me know. Like you doesn't change on it to. I wish it did, but it doesn't. Is that helpful? I could see I'm not going to get to all the different questions about that. So people whose questions, because I want to be mindful of time. And yes, I have another meeting after this. But please send me email. Please send me a social media. If I see a couple questions I didn't get to, please send them to me. I will answer them. It might not be till Friday. But yes, I will answer them, because this is a really important conversation and we can all make this differently. And I want to just shout out my colleague, friend, Elder. Thank you, Lynn Roberts. I love you. And I'm so grateful to get to this. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate you all.
And thank you, Dr. McLemore. We appreciate you today. Thanks for participating.
Thank you. See you all out there. Bye.